Good evening. My name is Carl Brown, and I'm one of the ministers at North Highlands Baptist Church here in Hueytown, Alabama. And this is my home. Welcome to my yard as we get ready for another backyard Bible study. So if you would, take a minute to separate yourself and get you a pencil and paper if you like to take notes. Get out your Bible and let's get into the Word. Tonight we're going to be studying the book of Ruth, the whole book. The whole book is only 4 chapters, and it has very clear different parts of the story of this amazing woman, Ruth. So the book of Ruth starts out by just telling us that it's in the days when judges ruled. We don't know exactly what time. I think we can estimate that it was about 120 years before the end of the judges. Before Samuel came along and before the first king came along. But that's just an educated guess. And so this story just all fits in place. I would say that it is definitely during a time when the Israelites were following the Lord. You know, in those times of peace when a judge did rule and they were following the Lord, instead of a time when everybody did what was right in their own eyes and they were wicked and being judged. So I think it was during one of those peace times. But let's get right into this story. Chapter 1, verse 1, In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech. His wife was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. All right, so this was a common thing that happened. When there was a famine in the land, you had to just go where there was food if you couldn't survive. If you weren't wealthy, if you didn't have the means to stick it out through the famine, you would go find work somewhere else or sell your property or whatever and go try to make money or get grain somewhere else. We've seen this several different times. It wasn't like today. They couldn't go down to the local food mart and buy food from other parts of the country, other parts of the world. They had the food that they grew, and if they didn't have any food where they were, they had to go get some. So they moved. And they lingered there, and they went to Moab. Now Moab, they had a large country of Israel to choose from. But they didn't go anywhere in Israel. They went to Moab, to a land that was ruled by different people. Let's keep following along with the story in verse 3. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. And after they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died. And Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Wow, total devastation. So right after Elimelech died, Naomi kind of made a bad decision. She made a bad decision in that she allowed her sons to marry Moabite women, which was directly against what God had said that they were supposed to do. Really what Naomi should have done at that moment is she should have packed up and went back to Israel, famine or no famine, and tried to get along and get back in with her family and marry her 2 sons into Israelite women at that time. But she didn't. She stayed there. And so Orpah and Ruth become part of her family. But now that her sons have died, and it's been 10 years that they lived there, and there are no children to speak of, Naomi is left destitute without any prospects. Let's continue the story. In verse 6, when she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people Israel by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. So she's finally now going home. She's heard the famine is over. So what does she do with her daughter-in-laws? She knows that they're foreigners and that they wouldn't really be welcome in her hometown. She knows that they are also, not pure. They're not virgins. They've been married for some time to her sons. And she knows that they were also childless. So they didn't really have any prospects because the children of Israel weren't really supposed to marry them for lots of reasons. And so, and so she just tells them, y'all need to just go home. Let's just do a do-over. Go home and do a do-over. And that's exactly what she says in verse 8. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. She kissed them, and they wept aloud, and said to her, we will go back with you to your people. Now this speaks really well of Naomi, because these daughters-in-law really loved her. And they said, we're going to stick with you. We're going to stay with you. And Orpah and Ruth both wept and at the thought of them being separated. And they hated to see Naomi like this and telling them to go home to their own people and to their own gods and back to their own household. Main thing, though, is that they loved Naomi. They did love her. So what does Naomi say to them? Verse 11, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me. Naomi just says, I've got nothing for you. I mean, I'm too old to get married. I'm not a prospect. I'm an old woman, and no one's going to want me. And even if they did want me, let's say I got married today. Let's say I got married and I got pregnant tonight. Well, are you going to wait 15, 20 years, 21 years for my kids to grow up and for me to give you to them? No, you're not going to do that. That's ridiculous. So go home. Go home and find you a husband. You both are young. Beautiful woman, go home. Are you detecting a little bit of bitterness from Naomi? I am. I'm beginning to really see it here. She's bitter that she's lost all the men in her life, all the men that she loved so dearly, her husband and her sons, and that she was caught in a foreign land, that she's without money or prospects. And she flat out says, the Lord's hand is against me. Verse 14, and they wept. At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. So Orpah left. But Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. Now this response, I just got to preface this response from Ruth, because this response from Ruth is quoted all the time, and I just want you to catch it in full context. When Ruth says what she's about to say here, and we're about to read, it is one of the most beautiful demonstrations of love, devotion, loyalty, faithfulness, honor that we have an example of. But Ruth replied, verse 16, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me ever so severely if anything but death separates you and me. Ruth showed total devotion to Naomi and had already accepted the culture and the God that Naomi worshiped, and she was not going to give that up, and she was not going to leave the woman she considered her mother destitute and alone. She wasn't going to do it, and she didn't. You see, Naomi's bitter. She wasn't going to leave her bitter and alone on her own. Good for you, Ruth. It's a beautiful thing. So Naomi just simply goes, okay. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So the two women went on their way until they came to Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the woman exclaimed, "Can this be Naomi?" Naomi says, verse 20, "Don't call me Naomi," she told them. "Call me Mara, because the Almighty has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? The Lord has afflicted me. The Almighty has brought misfortune upon me." Wow, Naomi is just really in a bad place. She's obviously depressed. She's obviously bitter with God. And she believes that God is punishing her, severely judging her for her sin of, I don't know whether, I wouldn't call her marriage a sin, but I would call the marriages of her sons, the leaving the country of her inheritance, intermingling with others. I don't know, but she just believes that God has just got his hand against her and his face against her. You know what? A lot of times we fall into that same category, don't we? I mean, Naomi fails to see maybe her part of this, or maybe she sees her part in this and realizes that this God's hand's against her because of her seeking another way, looking for going another direction than possibly his will. A lot of times I find and I see people who truly are blaming God for all the bad in their life, and they have a really hard time seeing their own contribution to their situation. And that's a frustrating thing to talk to people about, because if you're just looking like you're a victim, or that you are oppressed, or that just a holy divine God is against you, then you will be very bitter and you will be very depressed, like Naomi is. It's not the right direction to think about it. The right direction is to see how you got in this situation, and seek help from the Almighty, seek help from God. In chapter 1, we have the fall, and we have the fate of Naomi and Ruth. And so now they're back in Bethlehem, back among their people, but absolutely destitute. They really don't have anything. That brings us to chapter 2. Chapter 2 says, "Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, a man of standing whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, 'Let me go to the fields and pick up leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor.' Naomi said to her, 'Go ahead, my daughter.' So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind harvester. As it turned out, she found herself working in a field belonging to Boaz, who was from the clan of Elimelech." Let's talk just for a minute about her going out and gleaning in these fields. In the law, and what we saw set up in the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, there was a law of the harvest. There was a rule of the harvest to help with all the people who were destitute and poor, and the people who were widowed and needed, had no ways of getting food. The rule is that they weren't supposed to harvest the entire field, that they were to leave the corners unharvested, and that as they're gleaning, as they are cutting down and picking up and bundling all of their harvest, that whatever falls to the ground, they're not to come back behind and clean that up. They're supposed to leave that there, and anyone who is in need can follow after them and can, harvest from the corners and pick up the leftovers that are falling to the ground. It's hard work, but it is a way for them to have food. And so they wait their turn. They wait until the harvesters come through, and then they glean or harvest behind them, and they pick up what's on the ground and what's left over. And that was a rule that was set up, and it's actually kind of smart. It's just a way to help take care of the food needs of the very poor in their society. And so Ruth was a very humble woman, obviously, because she was willing to go and do that. She's like, let's not die, let's not starve to death. I'm young, I can work. And let me go and glean these fields and get us some food, get us some bread and barley so we can live. She wasn't afraid of hard work. And so she did. She went out there and she worked, and it just happened to be in the field of a close relative to Abimelech, her father-in-law. Just then Boaz arrived from Bethlehem and greeted the harvester. "The Lord be with you." "The Lord bless you," they called back. I'm just saying, I think Boaz was a great man, because he comes in and he's talking to his employees and he says, "The Lord be with you," and they enthusiastically yell back, "The Lord bless you." That just gives me an impression of a happy, jovial employer that the employees loved. His workers loved him. It's what it looks like to me. Verse 5, Boaz asked the foreman of his harvesters, "Whose young woman is that?" The foreman replied, "She is the Moabitess who came back from the Moab with Naomi." I just want to stop here and just say, that's all he had to say. Remember, everybody went crazy when Naomi came back. And that was from the clan of Abimelech. So that's a family member, and he knows it. So everybody knew who this was. That's all he had to say. It's the lady, the Moabite, who came back with Naomi, who's taking care of Naomi. She had a good reputation. So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you. And whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you take notice of me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother in your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of the harvest, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge." So Boaz, being an honorable, being a great man, and obviously a man of wealth, because he not only had that, he had his own fields, and he had a foreman and several workers, which was a sign of wealth, that he wasn't doing all the work himself. And he comes out and he hears about Ruth and what she's done, and he wants to honor her. He wants to show her a favor for what she's done to Naomi. And he brings her, he sets her aside, he says, listen, don't go to any more fields. Stay with this field, stay with my guys. Matter of fact, drink from the water that we have, and when you need to rest, you go rest, and when you come back, you stay with my girls, and don't worry about my guys. My guys aren't going to touch you. I've told them not to touch you. Well, that was a tremendous favor. That was quite a blessing for Ruth, and she was honored by that, and she was humbled by that. She said, "Why would you do this for me? I'm a foreigner." And then Boaz gives her the flat out reason. It's because you have honored Naomi, and it's because of what you have done, and I want to bless you. Let me help. I think actually Boaz was impressed with her humility at that point, because then when he sits down to eat in verse 14, he invites her to come over and eat with him. Hey, come over here, eat with us, and dip your bread in the good stuff over here, and have some of this roasted grain, and have all that you want. And so he invited her over to his table, and she ate, and she couldn't even eat all they gave her, and she saved the rest. And Ruth works all day long, a long, hard day, and she comes back to Naomi, and because of what Boaz has done, he even took the guys aside after she went back to work and said, "Hey man, pull some of the good stuff from the bundle and give it to her. Make sure that she gets everything she wants, and then some." When she goes home after a day of gleaning, she comes home with 30 pounds of grain. That is a tremendous amount of grain, way more than a day's work, and about a month's worth of actual food. And so what a blessing it was for them to have 30 pounds of grain, and Naomi is overwhelmed. And then Ruth, in her thriftiness, actually pulls out and gives Naomi the leftovers from lunch that she had. She couldn't finish everything at lunch, but she wasn't throwing that away. She saved it, and she was always mindful of her mother-in-law. And so she gave it to her mother-in-law for dinner while she told her of all the great things. And listen to this beautiful thing that we see here. God gives hope to Naomi in the midst of her bitterness. Look in verse 20. When she hears that it's Boaz, she says, "The Lord bless him," Naomi said to her daughter-in-law. "He has not stopped showing his kindness to the living and the dead." She added, "That man is our close relative. He is one of our kinsmen redeemers." So let's talk about a kinsman redeemer. What is a kinsman redeemer? Or what is a guardian redeemer, as some of your Bibles might say? A kinsman or a guardian redeemer was someone that was well-to-do in a family line, in the clan, kind of the head of the family at that time. If it was the mafia, he would be the boss man. He would be the head, and so he kind of protects the whole family and their family line, and protects the inheritance that they got when they came in and were given their inheritance by Joshua. They kind of protect that land. So let's say that one of them is in bad shape and they have to sell their land to make some money. Well, to keep that land in the family, the kinsman redeemer, the guardian redeemer, would buy that land from their family member because they were well-to-do and they could afford it, and it keeps the land in the family. That's one part of what they did. They protected them when they were in hard times. The other thing that they did is they tried to continue the family line of any of their family members. And this was very important to them back then. And so if someone died, if a man died, his brother would take his wife as a second wife to himself, or a first wife, and their first child together would be considered the son of his dead brother. But that would go out beyond brothers. It would go to cousins and second cousins, and go somewhere in the family line. And whoever took her as a wife, their first child would be considered a child of Abimelech, or the one who had died, to continue the family line. That was a very important part of a kinsman redeemer as well. So they helped protect the land, the inheritance, and the family line. And that's what Boaz was. Boaz was very wealthy, and so he was one of the heads of the family line of Abimelech. But what I really love about this scripture in verse 20 is how Naomi's attitude is beginning to change. That Naomi finds some hope, and she blesses the Lord. She says, "The Lord has remembered us. He has remembered my husband, my sons, and he's remembered you and me, the living and the dead, and he is showing kindness to us." Now here's the kicker. Naomi, we have no signs that Naomi had changed from her depression and bitterness before this happened. This is God acting out of his love, out of his providence and care and compassion and mercy and grace for Naomi and for Ruth, before it was even asked for. Because remember, Naomi calls herself Mara, bitter, because God has abandoned her and his hand is against her. So God comes and meets her in the place where she is. And I just want you to remember that. God will meet you where you are. You do not have to clean yourself up. You do not have to get over or get out of or get ahead of your situation before coming to God. God will come to you. He will meet you where you are. He is a God of love. He's a God of mercy, always seeking to bless his children. Brings us to chapter 3. Now, Ruth stayed and worked just like Boaz asked her to in the fields there for both seasons, for the barley and the wheat season, which means that she worked in his fields, ate at his table, drank from their jars, and hung out with him for 6 months. She was a hard-working woman. Chapter 3. One day Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not try to find a home for you where you will be well provided for? Is not Boaz, with whose servant girls you have been, a kinsman of ours? Tonight he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash and perfume yourself, and go put on your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." Verse 5, "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Naomi comes up with a plan. It's been 6 months to a year since she's been hanging out with the girls from Boaz, and he's been helping take care of them. And she says, "You know what? He's our kinsman redeemer. Let's see if he will take the responsibility and make you his wife. This is what I want you to do. I want you to look your very best. I want you to go there tonight, and when you look your very best, you're clean, you smell nice, you look nice. When he goes to bed, after he goes to bed, I want you to go and uncover his feet and lay down there, and he'll tell you what to do next, because he's a man of honor." Naomi is trusting that Boaz is a man of honor and integrity. Naomi is also asking Ruth to put herself in a very precarious position. I mean, a very vulnerable position, to lay down at the feet of a man during the night while he's sleeping. And but that's what she says. "You're telling me to do it, I will do it." And so she does. She follows him, and she lays down, and she uncovers his feet. Now, I don't know why she uncovered his feet. Maybe she uncovered his feet to get his attention, to wake him up, where he would, I don't know. But she lays down at his feet. Basically, she's putting herself at his mercy, at the mercy of Boaz. But the very fact that she is a single, widowed, young woman laying at the feet of this man at night takes extreme risk, because if Boaz wakes up and he finds that it's inappropriate, he can shame her to no end. If other people see her there and don't see that she's just laying at his feet, and they think that it's inappropriate, they can shame her to no end. This foreigner who has no rights in Israel could be cast out, could be stoned to death, could be whatever, and lose all that she has gained through hanging out with the ladies with Boaz and all the favor that she's been given. It's an incredible gamble that Naomi's taken, and I think she's taking it clearly because it seems like Boaz is taking interest in her, and she has faith in Boaz's righteousness. Well, her faith couldn't have been better placed. Let's look in verse 8 of chapter 3. "In the middle of the night, something startled the man." Probably somebody taking his covers off his feet. "And he turned and discovered a woman lying at his feet. 'Who are you?' he asked. 'I am your servant Ruth,' she said. 'Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are a kinsman redeemer.'" What did she mean by that? Spread your garment over me. She is not saying, "Let me snuggle with you. Open your blanket there, and I'm gonna sleep with you tonight." That is not at all what she's saying. Spread your garment over me was flat out Ruth proposing to Boaz. This is the first recorded incident of a woman proposing to a man. She is proposing to Boaz. It is a term that they would use. It was a phrase that they would say that indicated marriage, when you spread your garment out over somebody. So basically, he's taking her into his bosom and covering them up. God uses this very language in Ezekiel when he talks about his people Israel. He said that he saw that Israel as a nation had come to the age of being able to be loved, and he said that he spread his garment out over her, and he said it in the way that he takes Israel to be his bride. She is flat out asking him, not for sexual relations, to be her husband. Spread your garment out on me because you are my kinsman redeemer. Do your duty and marry me. And it's, again, very bold by Ruth, clever by Naomi, but also well-founded faith in Boaz as a great man, because his response is fantastic. "The Lord bless you, my daughter," he replied. "This kindness is greater than that which you showed me earlier. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor." I think Boaz could not have been happier than he was in this moment when Ruth asked him to marry her. I think maybe somewhere deep in his heart he had a desire to do so. We have no knowledge of another wife that Boaz may have had. We do know that he showed great favor to her. And just my translation is this. Here's my translation from this. "Bless you for choosing me and not choosing any of the younger men, which are richer, whether rich or poor." Basically, translation, you chose me even though I'm old and I'm ugly. I'm no spring chicken, and yet you chose me. Bless you for that. Bless your kindness to me for that. He had no illusions about himself. And also, translation, Ruth was young and good looking, because we see here that he was obviously thought she had good prospects to find another husband that was young and rich. And he had already told her that no one was going to lay a hand on her. He had talked to the men about that. Well, they're not going to lay a hand on her if she's not good looking. So she's good looking. He told them not to lay a hand on her, and they weren't going to do that. And Naomi even said that it was good for her to work in his fields because that way no one would harm her. And basically looking out for her because she was young and good looking and a foreigner and a real target for any jerk out there. So translation, Boaz, I'm old and ugly, and you chose me. God bless you for that. May God forever bless you for that. Why can I relate to that? And the translation, Ruth is young and beautiful, and he could not be more thrilled. But he doesn't stop there. Verse 11, he says, "And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Although it is true that I am near of kin, there is a kinsman redeemer nearer than I. Stay here for the night, and in the morning, if he wants to redeem, good, let him redeem. But if he is not willing, as surely as the Lord lives, I will do it." Boaz wants to marry her, I think very much so, but he wants to do what's right. He wants to make it right. And he knows that he's not the closest family member. And by tradition, the closest family member has the right to redeem her and make her his wife. And so he's like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do everything you ask. But it's not appropriate for me to do it if this closer relative will be your husband. So let me take care of it. You rest here tonight, and I'm going to take care of it. So she goes home, and the next morning, and you can just imagine that Naomi was up all night, just biting her nails, just can't wait to find out what happened, because for the first time, Ruth has gone all night, and she laid out this extremely risky plan for Ruth, and she doesn't know the fate of her future and her daughter-in-law's future until the next day. So when Ruth comes home, she's all over. She's like, what happened? What happened? Verse 16, when Ruth came to her mother-in-law, Naomi asked, how did it go, my daughter? And she told her everything Boaz had done for her and added, he gave me this extra barley and said, don't go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. Then Naomi said, wait, my daughter, until you find out what happens, for the man will not rest until the matter is settled today. So we see in chapter 3 that Naomi went from a glimmer of hope to having full faith in Boaz to take care of her and her family and her daughter-in-law Ruth. And now we see the redemption, the payment and redemption back into the family, back into the fold in chapter 4. Verse 1, meanwhile Boaz went up to the town gate and sat there. When the kinsman redeemer he had mentioned came along, Boaz said, come over here, my friend, and sit down. So he went over and sat down. Boaz took 10 of the elders of the town and said, sit here. And they did so. So Boaz basically calls a meeting of the council of the town, of all the leaders of the town, and has the two concerned parties at hand, himself and the other relative that's a kinsman redeemer. So he calls a meeting at the city gate. Then he said to the kinsman redeemer, Naomi, who has come back from Moab, is selling the piece of land that belonged to our brother Elimelech. I thought I should bring the matter to your attention and suggest that you buy it in the presence of these seated here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, do so. But if you will not, tell me so I will know. For no one has the right to do it except you, and I am next in line. So this is a new bit of information. So there is a piece of land that Naomi owns, and I imagine they're living on, that belonged to her husband. And she's selling it, again, to try to get back into the family. And so she needs someone to redeem it. And all the property of Elimelech is connected with that land. And unfortunately, that includes Ruth. Ruth is part of the property, part of the redemption of Elimelech's property and progeny. The man says, I will redeem it. I bet Boaz got a lump in his throat, or his stomach lurched when the man said that he would redeem it, because he was really hoping he wouldn't. So Boaz says in verse 5, on the day you buy the land from Naomi and from Ruth the Moabitess, you acquire the dead man's widow in order to maintain the name of the dead with his property. At this, the kinsman redeemer said, I cannot redeem it because I might endanger my own estate. You redeem it yourself. I cannot do it. So, for whatever reason, once he mentioned Ruth, the other man didn't want to have anything to do with it. He was going to buy the field. He was fine with getting the property and wanted to come up with the money for the property, but he wasn't fine when Ruth was brought into the picture. He said that it would endanger his estate. Now, there are a couple of ways that it could have endangered his estate. It could have been other wives that he had that might have been particularly jealous wives, or he may have had all he could handle on his plate when it came to a woman in his life, or children, possibly. And so that would complicate things when it came to dividing his inheritance when he died. And he wanted to make sure his family line was more protected. Whatever it was, he said that the adding Ruth to the picture was too much. No, thank you. I'm fine. I can't do it. I cannot do it. You do it. And he said it in front of everybody. So that kind of settled it. So they have this really weird tradition that when they make a business transaction to settle it, their final settlement of it is they would take off one of their sandals and they would give the sandal to the other person. So when he's saying that he can't do it and he's telling Boaz to do it, he takes his sandal off and he throws it at Boaz. He gives it to Boaz, and when Boaz picks up that sandal, he is accepting that responsibility. He's saying, this is mine now. This guy has given part of himself to Boaz, and Boaz has taken up this part, and and the responsibility for the property and progeny of Elimelech. And so I sense a really good excitement in Boaz here, because he pops up and he says, "You are all witnesses. Did you all see that happen? Did you see it? Did you see it? Did you see it? You see it? Did you see it? That's right. You are all witnesses that I am taking on this property and I am marrying Ruth. You're all witnesses." He said that. You got it. I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page. And they all said, "We are witnesses, and we affirm this, that you're doing this." And then they went beyond saying we are witnesses, and they said, "And may you be blessed." They saw the truth of it. It wasn't about the field. It was never about the field. They saw the truth of it, and they said, "May you be blessed, and may Ruth be like Rachel and Leah. May you just have a ton of children," is what they're saying, "and may you be blessed in your household." So they throw a blessing back at Boaz, probably because they're proud of him for doing this for Naomi and for Ruth. But more than that, he's a good man, and he is happy. This is making him happy, and he is happy to do it, and he did it the right way. And so they're honoring Boaz and blessing him at the same time. I think that's just a really cool moment. And I can just really see him busting out after he got the lump in his throat when the guy said, "Yeah, I'm going to redeem it," to the moment when he grabs a sandal and he goes, "You're all witnesses." That's a happy guy. That's a happy guy. All right. So what happens then? What happens next? Well, I guess it's a Disney fairy tale ending. They live happily ever after. In verse 13, we see that Boaz took Ruth as his wife, and that they had a son, gave him a son, and they called him Obed. And so Ruth was blessed, and Boaz was blessed. Elimelech was even blessed, but Naomi was really blessed. And there's this extra bit of that we see in verse 14 through 16. The women said to Naomi, "Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth." Then Naomi took care and laid him in her lap and cared for him. The woman living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed, and he was the father of Jesse, the father of David. What a great epilogue. What a great living happy ever after. Not only are you blessed, Naomi, you've been blessed with a daughter-in-law, my goodness, who's better than 7 sons. And now she is one of our family. She's part of the Israelites and part of your clan. And their family line is going to go back in history. And you get to babysit and hold your grandchild. Ain't that great to get to hold your own grandchild in your hands, what you thought you would never have, how blessed you are. And then the tag is that this whole family line is blessed, because through Ruth came the line of Jesse, came David, King David, the greatest king of the age. And through David, King Jesus, the greatest King and kings and Lord of lords for all time, was in this family line. Now that's a true blessing. And that God took a lady from nothing and took her to that place of honor is something that only our God can do. And I love what the ladies did in the village. The ladies in the village glorified God. They didn't say, "Oh, how clever you are, Naomi. That was so good. Oh, how great Boaz. He's so wonderful." No, they glorified God. Praise be to the Lord who has blessed you this way, because only He could have arranged all of this. So this brings me to what I think is the reason that this story is in our Bible. Why do we have the story of Ruth? It's no great history. It's not necessary for us to know this about Ruth in the line of David, the story of Boaz. We don't need to know all of that. One of the reasons I think that the story of Ruth, this beautiful, beautiful love story, I think it's a love story not just between Ruth and her mother-in-law, certainly not just between Boaz and Ruth. I think this love story is between God and Naomi. See, this love story is a very clear reflection of what our lives are like and what God has done for us, what Jesus has done for us. We call Jesus our Redeemer because He redeemed us from a fallen state. We have a parallel, all of us, that goes right along with this whole story of Ruth. In the first chapter, where she was fallen and had a terrible fate ahead of her, we are the same way. When we sin, we are fallen creatures, and in our sin, and our fate is sealed because of that sin. Just like Naomi's fate seemed sealed, she had no prospects. She had no hope for a future because she had no one to get her out of her situation. In our sin, that is exactly where we are. We had no hope except for the wages of sin, which is death, and no way to rid ourselves of this terrible prospect of a fallen future. But then God enters the scene with Naomi, and He gives her hope that there is a Redeemer. There is a Redeemer, Naomi, if you will trust Him and put your faith in Him. Boaz. And we have that same hope. We have a kinsman redeemer. We have a Redeemer in Jesus Christ. Jesus wants to be our Redeemer and redeem us back to the family. But just like Ruth did, we have to put our faith in Him. We have to fall at His feet and ask Him to take us in. And if we do that, if we fall at Jesus' feet and we ask Him to take us into His family, to take us and believe in Him and trust Him and faith in Him, just like Ruth did with Boaz, this is beautiful, isn't it? Then He will redeem us. And that's what Jesus does. He redeems us. Just like Boaz redeemed Ruth, Jesus will redeem us. And because there is another that has a claim on our life. That's right. Death, hell, and the grave, Satan, has a claim on us because of the sin in our life. But Jesus is willing to make the payment and has made the payment to redeem us and to set us free and to take us into the family for our own happy ever after. That's beautiful. And that lines up perfectly and parallels with our life. I hope that Jesus is your Redeemer, that He's mine, and it changes everything. Everything. I hope you've enjoyed the study in Ruth as well. I love this story. It's beautiful. It's a blessing even to read it anytime I read it. Next week we'll be getting into 1 Samuel, so we're getting into new stories, which are always fun, about the children of Israel, about Saul. And so I'll be reading ahead in 1 Samuel, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Good night.